Let's frost our honeybee on the honeycomb. We have this big rectangular base that we're going to be frosting onto. Whenever you create your base, you want to frost this first layer or this first stencil 3 times to create a nice sturdy base. Because our stencil has such thin pieces of plastic at the end here, you want to tack that down, but then you also want to anchor on either side of that piece of plastic. And I'm always going to be anchoring at the top or the bottom of this shape, just because those pieces of plastic are fairly thin, which makes it so that they tend to bend a little bit easier. So by anchoring them in those spots, it makes it so that we don't accidentally push icing underneath or smudge our edges. Come in at a 45-degree angle, and you're just going to gently scrape across. And you want this layer to be fairly thin so that it dries quickly before we add the next layer. I usually have my desktop fan blow on it for about 10 to 15 minutes, and you'll know it's dry because it'll go from really shiny to kind of a matte finish. This is the second time that we will be frosting this base. These first 2 layers are going to be white because we're not going to see them. This next layer that we do, the 3rd layer, is where we will actually be doing our base color, which is going to be a light yellow. But for these ones, we don't have to worry about color matching anything just yet. Makes it a little bit easier on this 2nd layer and the 3rd layer. You don't have to anchor your stencil as well, just because it does kind of snap into that dried base that you already frosted. Anchor on one side and peel from the opposite. This is going to be the last time we frost this first layer. We just want to make sure that we get this lined up. There we go. This color I made from yellow and a tiny bit of red. You want this layer to be thin, just like the rest that you've done. Basically, if you scraped any further, you'd start seeing the white shining through. You can see on these edges here, I have some spots where the icing did pull upwards a little bit with my stencil. So I'm going to let this dry for about 30 seconds, and then I'm going to come in and tamp these down. Make sure that you save this yellow color, because we're going to be using it a lot to create the other colors in this design. This just helps the colors flow a little bit better when you use them throughout all of your colors. Our A2 stencil is the stencil that everything is going to build on. So this is the base to the rest of our design. You can see a lot of larger holes here. And that's just because that's where we're going to have our actual little honeybee is going to be right down here, and then we're going to have 3 different leaves up here on top. I'm just going to make sure that my frosting is the right consistency before I go too much further. You want it to be a nice toothpaste-like consistency. So basically it'll hold its peak, but then it'll start to kind of curl over on the end. And it's nice and smooth. And you can see I put my colors on the side of my bowl there instead of directly into my icing. And that just makes it so I can slowly add each color in. And to create this color, I used quite a bit of yellow. and then some red and a little bit of black. And that just got this really, really nice color. When we go to frost this, you want to look at any free-floating pieces of plastic. So you'll see down here we have several that point inwards towards this little honeybee. We want to make sure that all of those get tacked down so that we don't end up pushing underneath them. Same up here, we have a few that poke out, and a free-floating piece is basically a piece of plastic that comes out and it doesn't necessarily attach to any other pieces of plastic. It's just kind of hanging out there. Make sure that your stencil is centered into your base as close as you can get it. Just kind of eyeball it. I'm actually going to get a little less icing on here because we're working with such a small space that we have to tack down a lot of pieces without pushing underneath them. So I have a little bit less icing, and I am not going to go all the way through. I am just coming in enough to tack down these pieces. So now that all of those on the top are tacked down, I should be able to pull it from the bottom without worrying about pushing underneath those. And then I can get these ones over here on the side. Because once you tack down a piece, since we're not pushing really hard, once it's tacked down under that icing, you can swipe any way you want and it's not going to push underneath. Let's come up here on the top. We should be able to frost directly over. I'm just letting the weight of the spatula do all the work. And you want to remember that you need to still kind of trace your shape so that you don't push underneath the edges either. Now all of our free-floating pieces are done. I'm just going to come through very lightly and trace the outside of this shape. Once you get all that icing in there, you can just come through and scrape off some of the excess. This just helps when you go to flatten it all out, helps that icing not push underneath. And again, I'm just going to let the weight of my spatula plus a tiny bit of pressure do most of the work on this. And with these finer details, I don't mind going over it a couple times because I'm not really pushing very hard at all. You know that you have it thin enough. Once you start seeing your stencil showing through so you can see your actual design there, that's when you know that you've got that thin enough. And as long as it's all flat and how you like it, you can anchor on one side and smoothly peel from the opposite. And that will give you those amazing honeycomb pattern. On this next layer, you're going to start seeing the outlines of the different designs that are going to build on this. We can see our honeybee here, our two leaves up here, and then this opening is still there as well. I'm just kind of pushing down these little pieces of plastic into the crevices wherever I can. This just helps tack them down. Again, we're going to want to focus on this bee. And this color, I used the same orange that we had here, and I just added more red, yellow, and black. So it's the same one, it just is darker. And we just want a little bit on there, and we're just going to tack down these little free floating pieces. Oh, my stencil shifted, so hopefully it didn't mess anything up. I shifted it back as soon as I noticed, and we'll see what it looks like when we peel it up. I do always frost a couple of extras, so I have a couple extras off to the side here. So if I do mess something up, I don't have to worry about it because I created more. Because it's really not that much more time or effort to create multiple of these at a time. So if that did shift and mess it up, I can just switch it out for one of these other ones. And it did shift a bit here, so I probably will be switching this one out for one of my other designs for the rest of this video. This next layer is going to give us the dark brownish black for our little honeybee here. And I just used this same darker color that we just created, and I just added a bunch of black to it. I'm going to add a little bit of water, and I usually add 1 or 2 drops at a time. I just use a little dropper tool. And I add 1 or 2 drops at a time so that I don't accidentally make it too runny, because then we can't frost with it if it's too runny. Okay, we again need to tack down anything on this bumblebee or honeybee. And then just add the rest of your icing on there. There's your nice dark, what's going to be the outline and the stripes and body for your honeybee. This next layer is going to be the veins of your wings. To get this color, I just took this orange color. Let me show you real quick. I took this orange color that we did for the honeycomb, and I did 1 part of that orange color to 1 part white, and then I slowly added black to it until I got the color I was looking for. And here with the wings, I'm going to go straight up so that I don't push underneath those little tiny thin pieces. And then just come straight across on the stripes. Now we can start seeing our honeybee coming to life. This next stencil is going to add the yellow for our little honeybee. It's really going to pull this honeybee all together. Again, I'm going to want to pull up in the middle here and then out and across. And I'll make sure to get on the legs because there are the little tiny pollen buckets on the legs there. Make sure that you're seeing that plastic through the frosting before you peel this up, because you want to make sure that this layer is fairly thin. Look at the details on those wings. This is the part where it just makes me super excited to see this whole design finally coming together. I also forgot to mention that this color that we just did is a mixture from the base yellow and then this orange for the honeycomb. And most of it was this base yellow, and I just slowly added a bit of this orange into that yellow until it just became slightly different from that vibrant yellow. This is why it's really important to kind of hold on to those colors. That way you can mix and match to make everything flow and look really nice together. We're going to add the highlight onto the wings now. I'm just going to tap them into place so that they kind of hook in there. And this color that I have here is made using this darker color for the veins of the wings. I just took my white icing and I slowly added that darker color to it. That way it looks more like a highlight off of that wing. So this kind of matches that darker veins pattern. I'm going to put my finger right here in the middle and just pull outwards. And then on this one, I should be able to pull inwards and all the way across. And I'm not going to get my big scraper out for this. I'm just going to scrape across until it looks nice and flat. And then we can peel this off. So now your wings have those highlights. And our bumblebee is all finished, and now we're going to work on finishing up our leaves. We're going to create the dark color for these leaves, so this will basically create the veins of our leaves and the outline. This green color, all I did was I colored the icing with green and blue, and then I took this dark color from our little honeybee here, the almost blackish brown color, and I added it in until it got nice and dark and kind of got this nice forest green color. Anchor your stencil down and we'll just stencil these like we've been doing throughout the whole design. I'm just going to scrape this across a little higher up since this does not cover that bumblebee. So I don't want to scrape any of the design off of that bumblebee. I'm just kind of going over a couple times until I get the icing to cover how I want it. We'll let that dry all the way, and then we can add our last 2 layers to really define the details in these leaves. For this next color, I just added this darker green to some white, and then I added some extra yellow and green to kind of get this lighter green color. Make sure that you're frosting in the direction of your veins here so that you don't push underneath them. And with these leaves, you should be able to just use your spatula to flatten them out. This last color, I took the previous green that we had, and I did about 1 part of that green to 1 part of white. And that's how I achieved this color. I like to anchor down on the actual transfer and then hold down this part. That just makes these lay a little bit flatter so I don't push underneath them. Again, we're just going to use our spatula. I'm going to wipe off my excess icing. We're just going to use our spatula here to get all of this nice and flat. And there is your finished topper. You're going to let this dry at least 4 hours before you try and peel it off of this here and attach it to your cookie. I usually just kind of let these sit throughout the day, or if I frost them later at night, I'll let them sit overnight before I pop them off. That way they're just fully dry and there's no chance of them breaking when you go to attach them onto your cookie. Once you know that your topper is fully dry, you're just going to use a piece of plastic to scrape it off of this clear piece of plastic that you frosted it onto. You can also use just a piece of the stencil that you used to frost this if you don't have a scrap of plastic laying around. I usually leave this plastic taped to the table, but for this video I untaped it. So if you leave it taped to the table, it's a little bit easier because it's not shifting around. You don't have to hold it in place. But you just get your piece of plastic underneath one of the edges of your topper here, and you're just going to slowly slide it underneath. And if you feel any resistance, you can kind of do like a sawing motion back and forth to cut your way through. You're just going to go all the way through until your topper releases. Now it's ready to put onto your cookie. You can see how thin these are, so they don't really add too much of a hard bite to your cookie. When I add these to a cookie, I don't add a whole ton of icing underneath. I do make sure that the edges are all tacked down with icing and have that icing supporting it. So I do go along the edge here, and this does not have to look perfect because it's going to be covered up. And once you get that nice border, you can come in here and just kind of do a zigzag. You can experiment with different ways of attaching your topper and see what works best for you. I found that this works really well because once you put that topper on there and kind of press down on it, it does kind of spread out this icing underneath the topper. You're going to line it up on one side and just kind of drop it into place. And then you want to use multiple fingers to apply even pressure on this so that you don't end up breaking it. Because if you just push really hard in one spot, you can snap these toppers. But they're honestly surprisingly sturdy if you apply even nice pressure. I didn't quite go far enough out on these corners, so I'm going to come in with my frosting again. And I'm just going to make sure that these corners have supports through the icing. Alright, once I have the icing how I want it, I always come through and I just wipe it clean. And that just gives it a nice clean finish. And you can shift this topper for quite a while before that icing dries, so you can get it exactly how you want it. There's your cookie. And these videos and pictures really don't do these justice on the depth that you can achieve with these stencils. But this one turned out amazing.